Okay, what are we talking about this morning? We're talking about CoreLocation. Yesterday we spoke about local notifications that kickstarted Unit 5. Today we'll kickstart location services along with MapKit. So we'll be talking about CoreLocation for the majority of our lecture this morning, and close to the end or midway we'll start introducing MapKit and what MapKit looks like. Think of CoreLocation. Let's just introduce CoreLocation. Think of CoreLocation like the back end for your map UI, right? You get that data, the GPS data, the GPS coordinates, the heading, the compass heading, the altitude, whatever GPS information you're trying to find, that's CoreLocation powering that. So think of CoreLocation like the back end or the back end service of MapKit or your map UI, right? Or you could even think about it like a file manager. It accesses, like without CoreLocation, I do not have access to, for example, the user's location. I need to first go through CoreLocation, ask the user for their permissions to use their location in order for me to power my MapKit UI, okay? So that's why we started in MapKit, or we started talking about maps by introducing CoreLocation. CoreLocation is that framework that Apple gives us to be able to GPS locate somebody or a business or whatever it is with coordinates, that coordinate system there. We got an early hands-on experience with CoreLocation when we did our weather app. Our weather app had a function in there that was basically using CoreLocation to get a coordinate and convert that, not coordinate, to get a zip code and convert that zip code into coordinates. Do we remember that lab, right? So basically, we'll be seeing what that looks like with code today, right? So along the way, what are the things we'll be doing with CoreLocation? We will be asking the user for permission to get their current location. For example, I'm in Pursuit right now. I want to be able to know what coordinate I'm at. I'll be able to ask the user, like we did yesterday, can I use your location for my app? The user gives me permission. I will get updates via a delegate, and those updates will give me the coordinate of that user, right? So for example, a Foursquare app, for example, if the user wants to see coffee shops around the area, I would ask the user for permissions to use locations. I would get the user location, the coordinates, then I'll be able to populate a map around them showing coffee shops around them. Does that make sense? So that at the end of the day, that's where we're headed. We'll be able to have the tools and we'll be able to know how to set those up. Okay, so today we're introducing CoreLocation, and along the way we have to show MapKit at some point because we want to see visually what that location looks like on a UI. In that case, the UI we'll be using is MapKit, right? Or MK Map View to be specific, but we'll be importing MapKit. Other things CoreLocation can do, CoreLocation is very powerful, right? Along the way when we are doing our application today, I will simulate locations to see how we could monitor regions, for example, right? Yesterday we introduced local notifications, but along the way I also said you could monitor a region or you could have a geofence, and then you could give the user, if you're at a mall, for example, you could be like, hey, there's coupons at TJ Maxx or whatever, right? So at that point the user enters the mall, they could get a notification. So we'll be able to simulate using the simulator how, if I enter a region, how can I simulate some sort of notification, okay? So we'll do that along the way as well. And then we will go into MapKit and introduce annotations. Annotations are those red pins that we see on a map, right? So part of our lab for today, not our lab, there's a lab too, but our group project has to do with annotations. I'm able to search a venue and populate my map with an annotation. An annotation is the pin that I see on the map, right? You could customize those annotations as well, right? There's a lot of things you could do with MapKit and with CoreLocation. But first, to do anything with MapKit, you need to ask that user, well, you could do things with MapKit without getting the user location, but if you want to be more experience driven with that user's location, you have to access their current location, right? Other than that, anything you do would be very static. Like I could place pins on a map, but the user doesn't know where they are. Does that make sense? Right? Cool. So along the way, CoreLocation is the framework, right? When we say framework, we'll be importing CoreLocation, right? But when we import CoreLocation, the classes we'll be using is CL Location Manager, right? CL Location Manager is that manager. Again, think about it like file manager. It's that gateway to anything with location services. Whether it be requesting the user's permission, whether it be requesting the user's region monitoring, anything to do with location, we do it via the location manager. Apple highly recommends that we have one strong instance of the location manager. You don't have multiple instances running through the app of location managers. So in our app, we'll create an instance, we'll create a class like we did yesterday briefly. We'll create a class, maybe we call it location manager session or something like that, that has one instance of the location manager. And along the way, the location manager has a delegate. Because how else can we know the user entered a new region or the user updated their location? So there's CL Location Manager. There's CL Location Manager. Think about it like the table view. And along the table view, we have a delegate. With a CL Manager, we have a CL Manager delegate. The CL Manager delegate is that delegate that gives us updates about location changes. Whether it be I entered a region, whether it be I moved from New York to New Jersey, whatever it is, or from street A to street B. The did update delegate protocol gets called every time something happens with my location. So those two classes there, or that protocol and that class is what we'll be using with CoreLocation. Okay? And along the way, keep in mind that CoreLocation could be very power intensive, so be aware of what services you use to power your location services. For example, if you're making a navigation app or fitness app where the user is running around constantly trying to get updates, that's battery intensive, right? Because the user the user wants to get as accurate information as they can about how many miles they ran, right? You don't want to have like drop signals there or wait till 1,000 meters to calculate the next spot, right? It has to be as real time as possible. So users at this point are aware of apps like that. Like if I'm using Strava to run around, I know that at some point the battery is going to run faster than if I'm not using Strava. Does that make sense? So with something like that, you want it to be as efficient as possible, GPS-wise, but the backdrop or the disadvantage is the battery, right? Because the more updates I'm getting from CoreLocation, the less battery I'll have at the end of the day. Does that make sense? So there's a benefit, there's a cost benefit there, and we'll talk about that when we get into setting up our location manager. So the two things we'll look at: access the users as a user for permission for the location, and next we'll look at region monitoring, where I will simulate like moving from one spot to the next and have some like local notification pop up. Okay, I sent out a compressed file of some images that we'll use for our local notifications there. That gives us more experience with local notifications. Okay. The local notification we could either do a time interval or a location based. We might just use a time interval just to show that local notification there with whatever image, whatever spot the person is in. Okay? Okay. Let's get started. Let's create a new project. Keep in mind that whatever file, whatever project we create today, it should be as beneficial to you in any CoreLocation project that you do as possible, because we'll try to keep it as generic as possible as far as like what you need for locations to get started with, okay? We need permissions, we need some delegate methods that we need to get updates from, so we'll have a class that we create. But let's get started. We'll create a project, and we'll call it CoreLocation demo. That's fine. Don't just call it CoreLocation because that's a framework, right? So CoreLocation demo is fine. And next. Save it to the desktop. Okay. So as we said, we'll create a class that manages our CoreLocation manager. So let's go ahead and create a new file. It's a Swift file. And we'll call this file CoreLocation session. Create. Okay, we said the first thing we need to do is import CoreLocation, correct? I'm working with CoreLocation. I need to go ahead and import the framework. So let's go ahead and import CoreLocation here. Next, we'll create a class. We'll call the class CoreLocation session. Okay. We'll create a private instance. Should I want it private? No, let's actually make it public. Public. Call it location manager. And that's an instance of CL location manager. Okay, we'll create an initializer that sets up our location manager. We will also set up our delegate for our location manager. Because without the delegate, you don't get updates. With that delegate, we need to get updates. Updates such as the user entered a new region. The user changed their location, right? There was an error with location services. All those we need to capture with the delegate, right? So the manager by itself is not enough. I need to implement some minimum delegate methods to get updates from, okay? So right now we need to extend, or we need to have an extension to conform to our CL manager delegate. We'll create an extension here on our CoreLocation session. And we are conforming to CL location manager delegate. Take this out, take this out. Okay. We have an error here. I'm sorry? What's that?
I put the stubs in somewhere.
Oh yeah, don't put the stubs. We have an error here. Yeah, don't put the stubs. We don't want to put the stubs here. We have an error here that says CoreLocation session does not conform to protocol NS object protocol. CoreLocation is still very tightly associated with Objective-C, right? That's probably the first time we actually seen NS object here. In Objective-C, NS object is the umbrella for all classes, right? All classes in Foundation, NS object is that super parent. CoreLocation is still working closely with NS object protocol. If we say our object is a delegate for CL location manager, that object, when I say object, CoreLocation session is the object that says, hey, I want to go ahead and set myself as the delegate object for location manager, right? It needs to conform to NS object, right? So here, right away, we know we cannot use a struct here. So right here, this class needs to go ahead and inherit NS object. Okay? At that point, we are overriding. Now it says that, hey, you a subclass of NS object, you need to override the initializer. Before we were not inheriting from any class. Everybody with me? Before we were not inheriting from any class, but now we're inheriting from NS object. And here it says an initializer. So it's saying, hey, wait, if you are using this initializer, this now is an override initializer, meaning the parent itself has this initializer that doesn't take any arguments. So you need to explicitly mark it with an override, which we did. Right? So we marked it with an override because now we're inheriting from NS object. And now it says self-use before calling super init. So we need to go ahead and call super init before we implement self. So super.
You just put it right under the override.
What's that?
You shouldn't just put it right over the override and then you put super.net right under it.
You could do it there. So at that point, we have the basis of what we need. So any app you build in, whether it be the Foursquare app or whatever app you're dealing with CoreLocation services, at minimum, we have a strong reference to a location manager there. Remember back in our documentation here, where is it? It's probably not here. It's gonna be probably in here somewhere. Not gonna find it now. Okay, when I find it, I'll just come back and show you guys. But basically, the documentation states that having a strong reference to the location manager is recommended, and that's the way you want to go. Right now, through our app, we'll have one location manager, and any view controller we use is going to get that instance of that class, right? We'll inject it or we'll use it in that class that we need. Yes?
I just want to know why you, unlike 14, bagged out the variable, but you're already initializing it.
Yeah, so we don't need that, thank you. That's what you said here,
Yeah.
right? So here, Ahad is pointing us to, we implicitly setting up our location manager, but we have an initializer that initializes it anyway. That's your point here?
Yeah.
So basically what's happening here, we could just remove that implicit exclamation mark. Because here we're setting our location manager with a value. Everybody? Everybody? Yes? Okay.
There's an error that comes up with this. Property self.location manager not
You gotta put it
initialized.
after the location.
Property, what's that?
Property self.location.
Make sure you call in super before you call self. Before you reference self.
Like right before it?
Yeah. Anywhere before it.
This was before it was 2 lines up from there.
I got the same error, but is it because?
I dropped it right above it, seems to work.
Yeah, just above it. Above it is good. Because you can't reference it if it hasn't been created.
Well, I had 2 lines above it. Now it's just on the line directly above it, and that works.
Was there any other self there? Try it again and build and see if you still have the error.
He had the super init as the first statement in the initializer.
Uh-huh.
He just moved it down.
Okay, okay. All right. Step 1, we have a location manager. Let's move on from there. So in our location manager delegate, let's take a look at the delegate before we continue on and see what methods we have on that delegate. So on our delegate,
Wait, Alex, before you move on, for the location setting the delegate, does that have to happen in the initializer or
where am I?
when we,
This delegate here?
yeah, when we're setting the,
You want to do it after the super init.
okay.
You have to call super first before you reference self. Okay, so let me select this out here because this is a big class. And also location manager, or call location, sorry. Okay. Let us briefly see what our manager delegate has. So our manager delegate, there's responding to authorization changes. This one we'll use. Anytime the user changes the authorization on the app, this method gets called. So if your user, for example, turn off location services, that delegate method gets called. That's a good place to take care of whatever you need to do, whether it be prompting the user like, hey, we need location services to go ahead and show you coupons for your mall or whatever it is. So that's one we'll implement. There's a did fail with error, which is good to know if there's some error going on there. There's did update locations. This one happens if you are using navigation. This gets called practically all the time. Like it just gets called over and over and over again, right? Because navigation, you need to get as accurate information real time as possible, right? So that's the most aggressive. We'll see when we set up our location, user location, we'll see what options we have. But the most aggressive one is for like navigation apps or workout apps where you want just real time data. So this will get called all the time. This one is deprecated. I don't know why it's still here. Did update to from location, that's deprecated. And anytime you see an API is deprecated, avoid using it because it will get eventually removed from the framework, right? Deprecation means at some point it won't be supported anymore, period. And it will give you warnings in your Xcode anyway. So here it says deprecated, okay? Good. Okay, so let's start with the bare minimum and then we'll work our way up. So let's go back to our delegate here and we'll say did update locations is one of those delegate methods. That delegate method gets called when the user changes their location. We'll put a print statement in here. And we'll say did update locations. And it gives you an array of what's known as CL. Anytime you see CL, CL stands for CoreLocation. So it gives you back an array of CL locations, right? Most likely you want to take the last one there. The last one is the most updated location you need. But for now, we'll just have a simple print statement saying did update locations.
Why would it be an array?
Because there's multiple locations coming in at one time. Like if you want to create some sort of route,
Okay.
different points in that route, you could create it using the array of locations you have. Okay, cool. Next up, we'll implement did fail, and we'll put a print statement here. Did fail with error. And we'll just put error. And for now, we'll just say authorization status. And this one tells you everything about what's the current status of the user services, access to the user services. What's the current access? Am I authorized? Am I denied? Is it not determined? There's a lot there, which will actually just print out. So we'll use a switch statement on status. And we have maybe 5 cases of statuses. So we'll start off with authorize always. Here we just got information about what's going on. And next we have authorize when in use. Next, denied. The user does not want your app to use their location. Not determined. It hasn't been prompted yet to the user. And restricted. Build. We need to put a default here as well because at some future date, Apple says that they could add more cases, right? So we have to put a default case there. Yes, we've done all the cases, but at some future date, Apple says, hey, maybe we'll add more cases, so you still need to capture a default here in that case. So default, we'll just say break. And let's put some print statements here. So authorize, I'll just simply copy this, paste it in here. Denied. Not determined. And restricted. Build, we have no errors. And the purpose of that, writing this particular protocol method out is just to see the state of access for location services. And I think we'll also get to this one, region, entered region, did enter region. We'll use that one to simulate locations, entering locations or entering regions. Did enter region, and it also has did exit region. Think of a region like a circle coordinate or a circle, and you enter in a circle, right? So a region would be a circle. We'll see what that looks like, and we'll see how to set up a region. So a region has a center, and it has a radius. So I could say, figure out what pursuit's coordinate is, and give me a region that's 500 meters, and anytime I enter that region, show some alert or some notification, okay? So we'll see what regions look like. All right, I think that's a good start here. We good? Good? All right, let's go to our view controller and add an instance of this particular class we just wrote. Private. We called it, I just call it location session. Call location session. Okay, let's run the app. Why are you here? At minimum, we should see not determined in the console. Do we see that? In the console, at minimum, do we see not determined in the console? Printed. Kelby? Okay, still waiting for it to run. Good. Greg? Okay. Fridays? Mel?
I need you to go back to
The last protocol method? Shania? Oh, you will see not determined? Look at this, yeah? Wait, what you say? Okay, cool. Close reopen and does it see it? Okay. Sorry. Are we all able to see not determined? Okay. That means, yes, sir.
What's the difference between denied and restricted?
Let's see.
Let's pick on each question.
So here, these are the differences. Let me just take this up a little bit. So not determined is the state where the user hasn't chosen anything, right? I haven't prompted anything. Restricted here says the app is not authorized to use, right? Which is very closely related to denied. Denied, the user explicitly denied the app, right? So what is the difference there? There's not enough information to show the differences between the two. Denied is an explicit denied, and restricted would probably be to have no access to it. Next up, authorized, we know what that is, and always, or authorized always, is always use it regardless. And authorized when in use is only when the app is in the foreground, am I using location services? Let me select that out. The restricted one needs more, we need more information on that. Okay, cool. Any other questions so far?
So can it be like authorized and authorized when in use, or authorized?
Yes, it could be both, which we'll do. So we'll do both authorized when in use and always. All right, so now we know our class is working. Let us go ahead and continue working on our initializer. Our initializer sets up the delegate here. Now let's go ahead and, I'm back in the initializer of our CoreLocation session. Here, let's request the user's location. We have our location manager. We'll say request always, and we'll say, as Kelby pointed out, we'll say location manager also request when in use. Okay? At this point, we'll run the app. When we type those two in, we'll run our application. And let's take a look at the console, what the console says. It doesn't crash necessarily, like our image picker crashed, correct? When we tried to use the camera and we did not put that info plist key in. But here we don't get an explicit crash, but we do get in our console, this app has attempted to access privacy-sensitive data without a usage description. It goes on to say the app's info plist must contain an NS location when in use description. So we need to go ahead and put that in. And also we need to have an NS location always and when in use. So we need to have those keys in. So does everybody see the key in the console? Those two keys. The first paragraph, the first console log. Do we see that in our console log? Yes? No? Yes? Anybody not see it? Matt, did you, in your initializer, did you request always authorized and when in use authorization? Yeah, you're in it. We want to have both. Again, Apple is every year they're trying to come out with more security measures with location manager, location services. The user will, at minimum, it will do when in use. And it will prompt the user again at some point, do you want this app to always use your location services? Everybody with me? I'm not getting access to everything right away. My intent is for always, but first what the user sees is when in use. And then at some point throughout the app again, they'll have an next prompt saying, the app is running in the background. Do you want it to continue using running in the background? Do you want this app to always use your location services? With me, I see the Google prompt that happens, I'll say always, or whatever app that I know its intention, I'll say always. But at that point, if it's a news reading app or something like that, I probably want to say no. Like, I don't want to always have location services for news. Right? What are you doing?
Does that affect the battery?
Yes. And again, the user at this point, whether it be Android or iOS, they know if you say always with location, there's a battery deficit there, right? With me, with Google, I know what I'm using it for, so I'm okay with that. But if it's like an app where the location doesn't have any benefit to me, I'll totally say no. Does that make sense? Yeah. Unrecognized selector. On what? On what property? Okay, next step here, we need to go ahead and add the keys to our info plist, right? So let's just put a comment here. The following keys needs to be added to the info.plist file. And here, we'll just put in the keys that we need to add. So this is key 1. Madame Tiffany, ¿qué pasó? And key 2. And we need to give them descriptions. Very similar to when we did the camera app. We gave it the key and we said, why is the app using it? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So those are the 2 keys. So I'll copy the first one, right? I'm copying the first one. I'm going to the info plist. I'm clicking on that plus sign here. Do we all see the plus sign at the top where it says information property list? Yes? Click on it and paste the key. Whichever key you copied, paste it right there in the field. Paste it and press enter. We'll do it a second time again, so that's fine. So I pasted the first key in, and here it tells me privacy, location always, and when in use description. Do we see that? All right, let's go ahead and get the second key. Where am I? Second key, copy the second key, go back to the info plist file, zoom in here, click on the plus sign. Do we see the plus sign? Click on it. Once you click on it, it gives you that new entry, that new field. You paste the key in. And press enter. And in the body area, just give it a description.
So, what do we, what description should we do? How did we get the whole thing? Is it because the screen is wide?
What happened?
How do you get your whole screen to?
I zoomed in.
Oh.
Zoomed in. Okay, so we need to give it a value, right? We gave it a key, and now we need to give it a value, some description that the user sees. So here we could simply say, we must have your location. I mean, the user would delete that app, right? Right. Just in if we're awake.
We're coming for you. Right. I see you.
Very good. Awesome. Okay, cool. So we added those two keys. Let's go back to our CoreLocation session, go back to our delegate methods, and make sure that we have print statements everywhere here so it could get captured. Our print statement got printed here in our did change authorization, correct? Yes? Yes, because we're able to see not determined. This is where it came from, right? Next up, okay, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and run the app again. I run the app again and I get the dialogue, right? Do we all see the dialogue? Do we all see the dialogue? Yes? No?
Yes.
So before, maybe 2 years ago or whatever it was, there was the option to, right away, the first time, always allow, right? But that was getting, as developers do, misused and abused. So now, even if we have always, you don't see the first time you run the app, right? So the user has one of those options, allow once, don't allow, and allow while using app. Do we see that? But as you use the app, you'll get a next dialogue at some point saying, are you okay with this app using your location always? Everybody with me? So it's like a second barrier of like, is the user sure? Right? Does the user really want this? Okay? So here we'll say, allow while using the app. And right away, the minute we click on it, what happened? Our delegate method got called, and it printed authorize always. Do we see that? Okay? Whoa.
So we say allow once. Let's say authorize when you use.
All right. Next up, let's continue.
Hey, can you explain why it says authorize always and not authorize all?
It will give the user a prompt again.
But it shouldn't default to always, right?
It shouldn't default to always, but it will give the user, like right now it uses it, but it will give the user an option again. Do you want this app to always use your location?
And then it will switch it.
It will switch it to when in use, or vice versa.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it's